I'm Paul Eakins, and I'm Director of the UCL Institute for Sustainable Resources, and we are in association with the UCL European Institute, co-organisers of this event. I'm just going to give you 5 minutes background to it, which I think will help then as we move through it. We are at the start of a new European Commission cycle, as I'm sure all of you will know. The previous Commission, and particularly the Environment Commissioner, Janusz Potočnik, made an enormous thing of resource efficiency. It was adopted as one of the flagship initiatives of the Europe 2020 process, moving towards 2020. One of the things that was going to make Europe smart and sustainable, one of the things that was going to drive growth, one of the things that was going to make Europe more competitive in an increasingly competitive world. Potočnik is an economist by background. He made that case very eloquently. He brought his fellow commissioners largely on side into a platform called the European Resource Efficiency Platform, which had 5 commissioners on it, a few MEPs, a few national environment ministers, business representation at the highest level, a couple of academics, of whom I was one, and this was a body which met and arrived at some consensus decisions about how the resource efficiency agenda should be taken forward in practical terms. The European Commission is not known for its fast policy making, so by the time we got there, most of the 5 years of that Commission had passed, and the last throw of Potočnik's dice was last June, that's June this year, when he produced something called the Circular Economy Package, which contained, it was basically focused on the Commission's activities on waste, but was also very much a continuation of resource efficiency, resource productivity agenda, and Potočnik clearly threw it down really as a gift or a challenge, depending on how you want to look at it, to the new Commission. Now, the early signs from the new Commission have not been particularly positive, and we'll hear a lot about that in the first speech that we're going to hear. From my point of view, someone who places very great emphasis on policy consistency, I think it would be extremely undesirable for the new Commission to drop this agenda as if it had never been taken up, because all that does is undermine further people's trust in politicians. We've been told for 5 years that this is the best thing since sliced bread. This is going to make Europe grow and be more competitive. Growth, jobs, competitiveness are at the top of the agenda of the new Commission, and yet suddenly this agenda looks as if it's potentially going over. So that's very undesirable. This event comes about through my membership of another group Potočnik set up, a group of economist advisors, of which I was the vice chair. Each of the advisors had the capacity to do a research project for the Commission, and I decided that I would make my project a small research project carried out by 2 researchers at the Institute of Sustainable Resources, seeking the views of both business and policymakers on what the new Commission should do and how it should seek to respond to the gift, the challenge, the agenda that had been left it by the previous Environment Commission. This event is intended to help inform that research project, as well as to air some of its initial conclusions. You will hear from Teresa Dominic, who is leading the policy-making side of that, and Michelle O'Keefe, who's leading the business side of that, and then we will have some discussion and a panel in order to reflect on what they have heard. We've been really lucky in the people we've been able to pull together for this reflection, both in the final panel, but also in the initial intervention from Andrew Warren. Andrew will be known to many people here For many, many years, he was director of the Association for the Conservation of Energy, which, of course, energy efficiency was absolutely the core subject there. And he was enormously active in policy-making circles, both at the European level and at the UK level. Indeed, there's not much about the development of the energy efficiency agenda at both those levels in which Andrew has not been centrally involved. He's now no longer director of the Association for Conservation of Energy. He's honorary president, but he's going to share his thoughts about that agenda with us today. Of course, energy efficiency is not the same as resource efficiency. Energy is a very important resource, but there are all material resources which also the resource efficiency agenda was very much concerned with. But energy efficiency is a very good start, and we will broaden out the scope of the discussion once we've heard from Andrew. Andrew, welcome. Very nice you could be with us.
Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed for inviting me here all, and good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for those very flattering introduction. I'm not sure I wish to be held responsible for everything that has happened on energy efficiency, because there is a certain school of thought that says that the glass is very much half empty. I sometimes subscribe to that school of thought, I also subscribe to the glass being half full. And I think it's fair to say that if you were looking at how far energy efficiency policy has gone within the EU and contrast it with both what has happened, which you've heard from Paul about over the last 5 years, on resource efficiency, the circular economy, you would come to a conclusion that yes, the energy efficiency glass is very much half full, because there are things in place, noticeably a number of directives in place, which help to drive things forward. I'm afraid to say that I'm going to begin this afternoon's session by slightly raining on your parade and saying that my reading of what is now happening in particular the European Commission is that if the glass was even heading towards half full so far as the sort of resource efficiency argument is concerned, it's sprung an enormous leak in the last month or so since the Juncker Commission took over. I should say that I have, just to declare to credentials on this, Paul mentioned my role in the United Kingdom, which I retired from earlier this year. But I have, across the last 20 years or so, through this, I served actually on the Commission's first ever advisory committee on climate change, at a time in which people were asking what on earth this was. I did act as a personal advisor on energy efficiency, on resource efficiency, to not one, not two, but three different commissioners, some of whom were more effective than others dealing with energy policy. And more pertinently, I was, this is the one thing I'm genuinely proud of, the chair of the cross-government committee for the industry directorate, DG Entreprise, which came up with what has become the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is probably one of the most effective resource efficiency, energy efficiency directives which is around. Now, I said that I was going to be quite depressing about what has happened, and in some ways, if you take the sort of the high-level rhetoric that is coming from President Juncker, it's not bad. He just this morning, as those of you who have been following the news today may have heard, he went to launch the big new industrial policy area. I've now lost touch with the number of zillions of euros that this is supposed to generate in terms of finance to help to reinvigorate Europe's industry. But suffice it to say that only a relatively small proportion of that is actually going to come from the Commission coffers. Nonetheless, when President Juncker was talking to the European Parliament, he did say, and I say this as for the record, that the one thing he had to say at all on this entire agenda was that households and companies want to benefit from technological process and are crying out for action to become more energy efficient. So, as you might imagine, that sounds even better in French. The rhetoric actually has not been bad until you come down to look at the practicalities of where it's going. And I'm actually going to put to you that first of all we've got the high-level reluctance to get involved, both from the President of the Commission and from his number two, the Dutch Commissioner Timmermans, but also to relating to how the new commissioners have their portfolios divided up. My first concern, as I say, is with President Juncker. Certainly he had things to say about the need for at least binding energy targets when he went before Parliament, when he was seeking their endorsement to be the European People's Party's candidate, which is why he eventually became president. But subsequently, there have been a number of statements, both public but more pertinently private, which have, I have to say, given me deep concern on this. There was a letter that was sent jointly by President Juncker with his number two, Timmermans, the Dutch Commissioner, to all the other commissioners. It was a private letter that, no surprise in Brussels, it leaked. And what this basically said, and I think it has to be summarized, is the ambition that he has for the European Commission, I'm actually going to quote this correctly, is to be bigger and more ambitious on the big things and smaller and more modest on the small things. Now, in some ways, how could you possibly object to that? Well, the trouble is that an awful lot of the circular economy, resource efficiency, energy efficiency type arguments tend to break down to a whole series of discrete, relatively small things. And I've noticed that, for instance, even today when President Juncker was talking at the European Parliament, he was joking about the fact that we really don't want just to be known for dealing with the recycling of plastic bags. And while you can sort of understand the logic of that, of saying, dear God, we've got an economy across Europe which is scarcely growing and has scarcely grown for the last 6 years or so. Nonetheless, that has been put together, and it's in, as I say, in spades in this private letter, which Reuters issued a copy of. And it says very firmly that he wants to take steps back seriously from the whole of the circular economy argument, which Potocznik was, as Paul said, promoting so heavily under the previous Barroso administration. And remember, of course, that actually Barroso basically had a continuity of 10 years in office. And if one breaks this down to how, and most people sort of like to relate this to national governments, what's happened in the Commission is very similar to a complete change of government. It's never going to be expressed like that, but effectively what Juncker has done is not just to signal the fact that he's sort of worried about getting involved with too many nitty-gritty things, washing machine standards and inputs into various different resources, and much more wanting to be known for dealing with the big picture. But he's also, and this was my second point on this, has completely reorganized the way in which both the commissioners operate and how the various directorates, the equivalent of ministries here, report to them. And this is very pertinent indeed to this agenda. Because what has happened with, for instance, the environment portfolio, which previously was held exclusively by Hitachi. Now that has in fact now gone to the new Maltese commissioner, a man called Carmenu Vila, who has been, I gather, for 38 years a member of Parliament for Europe, and in fact did a master's at Sheffield Hallam University, united together, in tourism. And the reason why I mention that is that he hasn't just got environment amongst his portfolio. He has also got both fisheries and the whole of the maritime agenda. Now, I flag those up to you because anyone with following at all issues relating to European Union activities will know that there are very substantial commercial lobbies involved in fisheries and also in maritime activities, noticeably shipping, which is so important for freight movement, for instance. And there seems to be no doubt at all where the pressures will come on this particular commissioner to become active. And certainly, as I say, from as far as one can gather, his role to date when in Malta, the areas which he is more familiar with as one who is keen on tourism might be to do with the maritime side and possibly the fishery side rather more than the sort of ecological side. The same thing actually has also happened with the energy, because, and I should say incidentally, as a result of which this commissioner also has got a whole, it isn't just having that portfolio, he also has directorates which are dealing with those other policies and which will be requiring his time and attention. And one of the things I did learn when working very closely with three different commissioners, all of whom covered energy policy, is that any single commissioner can only push possibly one part of one agenda with success at any time in a commission. And given the fact that both Juncker and Timmermans seem to be pushing back on the whole circular economy agenda, and given the fact that when I mentioned the new Environment Commissioner's name, there wasn't a flicker of recognition of it in this room, I am concerned that perhaps this is not going to be deemed to be the number one priority. See, we're in very early days at the moment, and the Commission is not yet completed its fourth week. But nonetheless, one has had a feel for how they're moving. And certainly in the area that perhaps I know better, the energy field, we have the same Commissioner dealing with energy and climate change, which, if you like, mirrors to an extent what has happened in the United Kingdom, where we have one department covering energy and climate change policy. We now have one commissioner covering energy and climate change policy, but two different parts of the commission with two different director generals, that's the permanent secretaries, one dealing with climate change, one dealing with energy, and having very different views about the ways forward. So that is a complication. We also have a complication too, and again this is why I stress that what happened under President Barroso cannot be assumed to be anything like what will happen under President Juncker, is that we also have the arrival of a new tier of commissioners. And it's almost as if you've got a sort of set of commissioners which are vice presidents. We've always had those, but the vice presidents in this particular case, which has not been true before, do not have very specific portfolios. They cover a wide range of areas of activity. But inevitably, all of them have been told that it is the growth agenda which will control everything. And I say as an aside, and also I recognise this on record, I don't think I'm actually breaking too many confidences in saying the man who is now the Director General for Energy was talking to just after the new commission came in. Actually, they haven't in fact yet come into office, but nonetheless they were all being flagged up and going before the Parliament to be vetted. And he was saying he was having to brief not one, not two, but effectively 3 commissioners, because the energy and climate change portfolios are reaching across, as I say, not just the official people who are dealing with this. Now, that is one reason why, if you like, energy and climate change are more established now within the European system. And that is why, when I began, I said to you, I was very concerned indeed that the areas in which all these colleagues have been working so effectively over the last 18 months, 2 years or so with Commissioner Potocznik, that may not be leading at the moment to something which is going to be deemed to be as much of a priority as it was even this summer. And I conclude with just simply saying, I think one of the principal reasons is that whilst there have been some activities from professional bodies urging action in this area, I have personally heard very little from the business community of any type. I wouldn't expect Business Europe to do anything, they are Neanderthal beyond measure, but that is very firmly for the record. Of any part of even what is the more progressive, ecologically aware business community, of really saying that the circular economy, resource efficiency debate is something they really want to get into. I know best of all, perhaps, those in the energy efficiency industry, and certainly the feedback I have had from the European companies involved in this, as well as the UK ones, has been essentially, this is a complication. It's difficult enough getting the people to actually concentrate on something which has an obvious bottom line benefit. You know, you spend less money on fuel, you've got more money to spend on employing people and investing. The resource efficiency argument has not reached that stage at this point. And if I have a criticism, Potocznik, which is one who absolutely loves Slovenia, I feel disinclined to have, I do think that he did not seek to reach out to other parts of the Commission sufficiently, particularly those like DG Entreprise, but like also DG Energy, who might well have been able to continue to keep this flag flying. I sincerely hope that my assessment of what has happened in the last few months is unduly pessimistic and unduly downbeat. But I have to say, and I was asked to tell it as I saw it, I have to say that I am genuinely worried by this. I did go into print actually, but I think a number of you know the Business Green website. If you don't, it's an excellent one, free, for keeping up to date news. Just last week, I did a piece for them just saying how much I was concerned about an existing directive, the Eco Design Directive, which is the one that sets minimum standards and A to G labels on all sorts of energy user appliances. That also came under question from the Juncker-Timmermans letter to the Commissioners on the 7th. It's that sort of signal on things which all of us had assumed were very firmly in this half-full glass that really do concern me as to whether or not that excellent paper that was put forward by the Commission on the circular economy in the summer really has got legs for the future or whether it ends up like, I fear, far too many Commission initiatives filed away somewhere never to be seen again. Let's hope. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Andrew will need to leave us before the end of the end of this meeting. We were very lucky to get him at rather short notice for reasons I won't go into. So if there are any questions to him now on the basis of what he's said, I'm very happy to take them. Yes. If you'd like to say who you are, where you come from, then we'll get to know you a bit.
Sure. Johnny Hazel from Green Alliance. Do you have any sense of where the member states are on this? And were there any member states who will be pushing the Commission to keep resource efficiency on the agenda?
Undoubtedly, I mean, it's the sort of motherhood and apple pie issue that you will find very difficult to find a member state which says, oh, we're desperately opposed to this. So it won't necessarily run across overt opposition. I think a much greater worry is relative indifference. But you have got, I mean, there are all sorts of good things going on in Scotland, for instance, on this particular agenda. So I mean, I wouldn't get too worried about the fact that, that in EU terms this is falling, but it's still possible for member states, or indeed subsets of member states, in Scotland's case, to be pushing forward with this agenda. But I am not aware, and it may be that Paul and his colleagues are very conscious of the fact that, I don't know, the Slovakian government or something are very keen on this, but I have not heard that expressed very loudly indeed. Not perhaps in the way in which you get with the energy efficiency agenda, as Nicola will tell you, the Danes and the Swedes and the Germans pushing very hard on this, and the UK pushing back equally hard.
Yes, I mean, I'll just respond a bit on that. I was at an event called the European Resources Forum in Berlin a couple of weeks ago, organised by both the Ministry and the Environment Agency of Germany, where, of course, this subject came up. And there were a number of civil servants from a number of countries that are responsible for these things in their countries. At one level, it was fantastic to hear some of the extremely interesting and innovative things that were going on across a number of member countries, the Netherlands, France, our own UK, and some others. And of course, the Germans who were there were part of this agenda and were extremely concerned with the kind of developments that Andrew has said, and they did organise a letter from us, signed by the German minister, that was going to be sent to President Juncker and try to draw his attention to the importance of these activities. So there are these kinds of lobbying things afoot from the people who want basically the initiatives of the last Commission to be taken forward. How effective that is going to be, it's too early to say. We obviously are going to do our bit on the basis of the report that we put together. We'll have a meeting in the European Parliament and we've lined that up. We'll be talking to people in the Commission and elsewhere, and I hope to be meeting Bella myself fairly soon too. So whether that can overcome this indifference, and I'm sure it will be death by indifference rather than death by opposition,
absolutely.
And the fact that they will be focusing on other things that they perceive to be more important, and I think Andrew set that out pretty clearly. That's my perception. Any other questions to Andrew I've talked about? Yes, lady at the back.
Thank you. Veronica at the Heaven Company, and we are a corporate responsibility communication business. I wonder, given your concerns that you've outlined, is there any particular action that you'd like to see UK business doing to help to drive this whole agenda forward?
Yes, say it's important. I mean, that is in the end. Yes, I understand that. I mean, that is in the end what tends to work in Brussels, and it's one of the reasons why I must say I think that the Pope's remarks yesterday to the European Parliament probably struck a chord, saying, is this really all we regard as important? And sadly, it is the way in which the EU is now operating. That basically business voices count, I have to say it's very quiet indeed in an academic institution, but they don't just count double, they count quadruple the voices of those who may have studied something and actually can come up with very wise advice. That is the nature of the beast, I'm afraid. And this is why I think that the resource agenda may be in trouble. And I'd love to ask Paul from there a question in your session, which you had in Berlin. Were there many companies there who were saying this is incredibly important to us politically and we want to push this down?
No, there weren't. No, there weren't.
So I rest my case.
Sorry, if I could just follow up on that. It's interesting because from a business perspective, there are examples that I can think of immediately where companies are actually being able to demonstrate this whole closed loop circular economy and actually reduce their costs very significantly. But I guess the challenge is whether those sorts of examples are actually coming to where they need to be heard so that they can be picked up in an appropriate way and sort of help to drive that whole thing forward.
I'm sure you're absolutely right on this. I mean, this strike, as one who's been involved in the energy resource debate for some years, essentially this is what we had to do with energy. The distinction being is that people get fuel bills. So there is a more overt way of doing it. The complication there is with the resource efficient one is that the costs are all sort of amortized into things. And I think that this is, if you like, a personal brief on this, but that's always been my worry with this agenda, is that people don't necessarily extrapolate out to say, oh, but we could have saved on that bit too. Yes, I can see that. It's because there isn't an obvious point at which to do that. The joy, if I can put it that way, of dealing with energy efficiency is, as I say, you get a monthly or a quarterly bill. It may be inaccurate. It frequently is inaccurate, but it's anyway there, and it helps to concentrate minds a bit.
Okay, there were businesses at the European Resource Forum, but my memory of that event was not one in which businesses were jumping up and down and saying this is absolutely critical. Certainly not some of the big names. We have a big name from business with us today, and he will speak in due course. He may well jump up to that, I don't know. We'll see. But we're going to move on. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're going to have a pair of presentations now from Teresa, Dominic and Michelle O'Keefe, who are both researchers at UCL Institute Sustainable Resources, about what they have found so far in the research that they have carried out.
Hi, thank you, Paul. And thank you, Andre, for a very interesting presentation. And indeed, some of the things that I was going to cover in my presentation were already covered by Andrew, so it's great, so I will jump some of the slides. Here, just to set up the initial slide with some background context of the importance of the resource efficiency agenda and what have been the key elements of the resource efficiency agenda in the last years. Things that Paul already mentioned. It has been introduced as part of as one of the flagship initiatives of the Europe 2020 strategy, which was the overall growth strategy for the period 2020 in the European Union. It was made operative through a number of roadmaps. The most important one was a roadmap for resource efficiency Europe. And then it was finally included in the last circular economy package. That was one of the last communications from the last commissioner. As part of this process, as Paul also mentioned, there was a high-level advisory body created by the Potocnik, by the commissioner, which was called the European Resource Efficiency Platform, of which Paul was one of its members. And the role of this policy advisory board was to actually propose a number of specific policy recommendations on the area of resource efficiency. So specific policy instruments that will bring Europe to that vision that the roadmap proposed. Here there's a summary of the main recommendations of the platform. And during our research, we have used those recommendations and also some of the measures from the circular economy package to try to understand what might be the priorities of the resource efficiency agenda from the policy making point of view and also from the business side. There's things like the resource productivity target that was also included in the circular economy package, reporting of non-financial information, natural capital accounting, review of the waste policy. You will see that many of these measures, then they have been translated, they have been introduced in that they forward in the circular economy package. If you want any detail on any of these instruments, you can ask me at the end or maybe during the networking and drinks events. As I said, many of those initiatives were put as part of this framework or package, the circular economy package that was a communication that also included legislative proposals to review the waste policy and the waste targets. Around some of the main issues or main elements of the circular economy package, we had this idea of setting an enabling policy framework to promote the circular economy, and it included things like focus on financial instruments, shifting taxes, but also very specific instruments in terms of waste. In terms of I'm really going very quickly on this because I want to concentrate on the results of the interviews. On the legislative proposal to revise the waste target, it's an ambitious proposal, and we have targets like reduce municipal solid waste by 70% by 2030, or recycling of packaging by 80%, with specific targets for different types of materials, and also phasing out landfill by 2025 for recyclable materials. So why, being those key elements of the resource efficiency agenda, why did we decide to do this research, and what is what we have found out? Well, basically, as Paul has mentioned, there have been recent changes in the Parliament and also in the Commission that has raised some concerns, as Andrew was explaining, in a number of stakeholders that have been involved in the resource efficiency agenda, and also businesses and people generally interested in the resource efficiency agenda. So we thought that it was very timely to do this research now and try to understand what is the position of policymakers, but also businesses in terms of resource efficiency. Is the resource efficiency agenda needed? Are the business willing to promote resource efficiency agenda? What kind of instruments are going to be used, and what kind of policy measures or policy mechanisms are more likely to be accepted or supported by different stakeholders? This is a vision of the composition of the Parliament before the elections of 2014 and after the elections. So basically, we have a much more fragmented Parliament with the rise of the Eurosceptic parties. But the big changes, as Andrew was explaining, have been happening in the Commission and the new structure of the Commission, where they decided to introduce a figure of the Vice President, and the Commissioner, the Commissioner, will have to respond to especially the Vice President on growth, jobs and competitiveness, but also to the first Vice President and also the Vice President of the Energy Union. So, as we said, this has increased the layers of, has been called policy that has increased the layers of control. So any policy proposal will now have to be accepted by a number of different layers, and that's more opportunity for better players to act upon it and try to better any type of policy. after a lot of pressure from a number of stakeholders, with Franz Timmermans, because there was no mention in the political discourse. It was very much focused on the very narrow traditional view of growth and jobs, and did not mention anything regarding resource efficiency. And the last minute, after a lot of pressure, Franz Timmermans was given the sustainable development kind of role. And no one knows exactly how is he going to deal with that and what exactly is included into that sustainable development role. So we have seen that there's a new discourse that has a very narrow focus on growth and competitiveness, but also understood in a very traditional way, where they see that there's a trade-off between economics and environment. So that means that if we want to boost economy or growth in Europe, we have to relax our environmental protection legislation or framework. Something that is completely opposite to what the resource efficiency agenda message was trying to deliver, that it was trying to focus on the synergies that could be or could happen in terms of growth and jobs creation by improving the efficiency in the use of resources. Also in the there has been, as Andrew also mentioned, a leakage from private letter from Juncker to some of the commissioners saying something that it was quite unprecedented, that they will review a communication and a legislative proposal that has already been released by the Commission. It has been said that the circular economy and the air package might be under risk, and that the new president of the Commission might ask those commissioners to actually review those already released packages to see whether they will still fit within the growth competitiveness discourse that they certainly have the priority. Also in the mandate letter to Bella, the letter that Juncker writes to each of the commissioners specifying what are the key issues of their mandates. There was, of course, no mention to the resource efficiency agenda, but there was also this quote that it was one of the mandates is to assess whether the circular economy package actually fits into these growth and employment objectives of the Commission. There has been also quite interesting also, and in an opposite direction, there has been also letters of support to the resource efficiency agenda, something that is also quite unprecedented because some businesses and factories step up and write letters of support to the resource efficiency agenda, which I don't think there's many cases where actually businesses have write a support letter for a specific environmental policy. Well, it's not only environmental policy, but it's quite unprecedented in that way that policies have had to step up and say, we actually think that this is a future for Europe and that we want to really improve or increase the growth and increase jobs in Europe. We'll have to focus in this agenda because if we use all recipes, it's not going to work. So this is, for example, this is quotations from a letter that was sent to Juncker by companies like Unilever, Suez Environment, Philips International, I think a couple of Michelin and a couple of others, where they were saying we strongly think that the resource efficiency agenda should be taken forward. We also strongly think that Europe has to take policy decisions in order for this to happen. And they even specified a number of measures that could be implemented, like, for example, reduce VAT for recycled or reused products, or they mention also things like harmonized frameworks for labeling so that they can be better communicated to consumers. So there has been also support from the business community. Of course, there's also the traditional lobbies from Europe, like Business Europe, that are very much in line with the discourse of the new president. So yes, few methodological notes on the research that we have been doing that also Paul presented. Basically, the objectives of the research was to understand what might be the impacts of the changes in the Commission and in Parliament in the resource efficiency agenda, try to see what is the key priorities seen by businesses and policymakers within that agenda, and trying to understand what kind of policy mechanisms or policy approaches can be used to win support for resource efficiency policies in this new context. We have done we have done so far 7 in-depth interviews to senior policy officers, Brussels-based, but also representatives from member states and from Brussels-based institutions. We have lined up 11 interviews, so it is still an ongoing presentation. So I'm just going to present here the preliminary findings of this research. And then we have done some content and discourse analysis on the information that we have gathered. So what have been the kind of emerging themes that have come up from the interviews to the policy officers, that is the crowd that I'm going to present? Well, maybe quite small, I realize. But basically, they have pointed to this change in the policy discourse, and they have also pointed to this tension between the traditional discourse and the discourse from forward-thinking businesses that kind of support the resource efficiency agenda. So they have been seeing their attention that there's quite a lot of opposition from the Commission, but there's also support from the business community to the resource efficiency agenda. There's also one of the issues that has been discussed and that has come up in the interviews, also changes in the actor constellation. We have traditional lobbies, but we have also new lobbies that are lobbying for the agenda. And there's also, in terms of the decision-making process, this increase in the layers of control has been something that has been flagged up by most of the people that I have interviewed, and they are really concerned that this kind of increase in the number of layers of control might be something like an incrementalist approach where no new policies or no innovative policies will be proposed or adopted by the new Commission. In terms of key policy areas, I'll go through them in more detail when in the next slide. But there's things like extended producer responsibility that has come up in almost all the interviews. Things like eco-design, very important instrument that has also come up as one of the key relevant areas for the resource efficiency agenda. There's also the relations to the waste policy, and specifically a more focus on waste prevention. And there's also another topic that has been quite consistently brought up by the interviewees. This has been the need for indicators to actually measure the progress towards targets or towards, just to check whether policies are being effective or not. So in terms of the role of the European Union, we asked the people we interviewed what do they think was the role the European Union should play in the resource efficiency agenda. Most of the people we interviewed coincide in identifying 2 key roles for the European Union. One is to set up the framework condition and a level playing field between member states or among different member states, and the other one will be to provide a long-term policy horizon. They believe that that this kind of discontinuity that the Juncker Commission has set up in the European Union level was actually a very negative image because they thought that the European Union had to actually provide a longer policy horizon that will give certainty and for policy making at the member states, and will also go over the political cycles of the different member states, which is something that we have seen that is actually not happening because there's a lot of discontinuity from this commission to the previous one. Regarding the framework conditions, although everyone, in all interviews, everyone pointed to the need of these framework conditions and to set the enabling framework, there was quite a lot of divergence on what these framework conditions are and the type of instruments or policy mixes that will make up that framework condition. I think I'll have to speed up a bit. Basically, most of the people agree that, well, there has been changes in the parliament. The parliament is now more fragmented, it might be more difficult to adopt decisions, but the general feeling was the parliament is still the parliament. That's going to be the only chance for the resource efficiency agenda. The problem is the commission, and there's where there's a lot of concern that the commission is not going to promote anything in the area of the resource efficiency agenda, and only the binding part of the circular economy package that is already going to be discussed in the parliament next January is going to be the only one remaining part of the resource efficiency agenda. It's going to some slides. But basically, also we asked them about the circular economic practices. They believe that there's 3 key areas of this problems, or we're going to be possibly the 3 areas that are going to concentrate the debate in the parliament. That's the ambitiousness of the targets. Some of the member states are going to oppose to have targets set by Europe, and also to the ambition of those targets. Juncker himself was very worried about the ambitiousness of the targets, and he has said that in a number of occasions. The other key issue is going to be the methodology of calculations and the definition of a number of concepts around recycling. And the other key issue is that there is very little emphasis on waste prevention, and that might be also flagged out by some of the groups in the parliament. Regarding the priorities in the resource efficiency agenda, it's a bit what I said before, is to define a system of indicators to enhance policy coherence, improve the eco-design standards, and also extend its scope, and also introduce a number of reviews of the extended producer responsibility schemes that will include things like modulation of fees and individual responsibility for producers, and support new business models. Most of the interviewees actually kind of agree on these topics, but there was divergences about what might be the key priority of the agenda in terms of policy makings. We also asked about specific policy instruments, and everyone agreed that probably economic instruments are more in line with the general discourse of the Commission. So if anything is going to come from Brussels will be market-based instruments. But on the other hand, because the competence of the European Union in that area is very, very reduced or limited, probably it's going to be as happened in the energy side, that they are going to be set at a level that are actually not effective. I think I'll have to finish that, but we'll have these presentations on our website, and you are very welcome to ask me afterwards for a few more details on what has come out from the preliminary analysis of the interviews. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Teresa, and sorry for hurrying you a bit towards the end. We're going to have the business presentation now. You'll see that I was due to make 15 minutes of kind of waffle, basically, after these 2 presentations, and I'm not going to do that, so we shall win a bit of time. I'm hoping we'll allow you to have some questions to Michelle and Teresa, so that we can follow up on some of those issues after Teresa has spoken, and I'll try to give you a break too.
Great, thank you, Paul. So I'm just going to give a quick outline of the context of business and resource efficiency, give you some details of the business part of the study that we did. Teresa's already introduced the kind of wider concept, give you a quick overview of the findings that we have so far. As with the policymaker side of things, the business side is also underway at the moment, and some of the insights that we've gathered from talking to the businesses that we've spoken to. and then a quick summary and some kind of thoughts of my own from the discussions that I've had. So Andrew's already talked about the role of business in terms of lobbying and the European Commission. What I wanted to talk to is just give you an overview of, in practical terms, how businesses operate within the resource efficiency agenda. So you can kind of see businesses in a very reactive role, responding to member state and European regulations and policy, and also responding to consumer demand. You could also think of them as being proactive, part of a governance system where they work with policymakers to develop systems, and also encouraging consumers, providing them with products and information about which are the more resource efficiency solutions that they can actually choose. And when you look across the product life cycle, there are a few areas that you think, obviously businesses are part of that, sort of raw material extraction, the processing, the manufacturing, the packaging, and the retail. But even the use phase and the recycling phase, which are within the control of the consumer, actually can be influenced quite strongly by the design of the product. So businesses do have the potential to have a really strong influence over that resource efficiency agenda throughout their life cycle. So moving now on to the business part of the study. So far we've spoken to 11 businesses across a number of different sectors. The approach we've taken is semi-structured interviews. All of the respondents have been asked 2 questions. The first is, how would you prioritise the ERIC short-term recommendations for resource efficiency? And Teresa introduced those in her presentation. And the second is the circular economy package useful? So beyond those 2 questions, the interviews that we took, that we undertook, actually went off in different directions depending on who we were talking to, what sector they were from, what their particular interests were, what job they actually did, and how they interacted individually with the resource efficiency agenda. So what we'll present now is the findings from those 2 questions, which will be all of the businesses, and then some insights that we got from individual conversations that, as I say, may have gone off in various different directions depending on their own priorities and interests. So these are, I'm not expecting you to be able to read all of that, but there are basically 14 short-term ERIC proposals. And the first thing to note from this is companies were asked to identify each of the proposals as either high priority, medium priority, low priority, or no priority. This graph shows those that were identified as high priority. And so the most important thing to notice at the beginning is the fact that a company, at least one, has identified each of those ERIC recommendations as high priority. And what this shows is the importance of a really broad and varied resource efficiency agenda, because depending on the business and their own particular opportunities, a different aspect of the whole package may be more interesting to them. So looking at those that were most often identified as high priority, these were reviewing the EU waste management and prevention targets and developing indicators that cover carbon, materials, land and water. And these are, with the insights that I'll come to in a moment, focus quite a lot around those areas. They created quite a lot of discussion. The next 3 most prominent ones were systemic monitoring mechanisms for green public procurement, phasing out environmentally harmful subsidies, and setting ambitious and credible targets for overall resource productivity of the EU economy. Coming now to those that were least identified as high priority, these were also the ones that were most commonly identified as low priority. And that's initiating pilot schemes for natural capital accounting in both member states and businesses, and working towards a binding reporting framework for non-financial information. And we'll come on and discuss those in a moment. So now to the second question that we asked all of the respondents, and that was around whether they thought that a circular economy package was useful. And here we see nobody disagreed at all with that statement. And in one of the interviews, one of the businesses identified that the real importance of a circular economy package is the fact that resource efficiency has so many different interactions within it, and so it's really important to think about it as a whole. And that's where the circular economy package is really useful. So now I'm going to move on to some of the insights that we got from the conversations. And as I mentioned, this isn't necessarily things that every business said, but different conversations went in different ways. So first of all, on the indicators. As I mentioned previously, this was one of the most commonly identified as high priority. And there was a recognition across a number of businesses that the indicators were really important, but they're also really difficult, particularly around water and land. There's a lot of complexity to be able to get indicators that can be measured in the same way and can actually be meaningfully compared. And so this was an area that the European Commission could really come in and provide an evidence base to support those indicators. The interlinkages between those different aspects are also seen as important, not just standalone indicators, but how do they influence each other and what do we need to understand about that. And indicators were seen as having a real potential to incentivize technological development, to have a really positive impact within business if they're done well. If they're done badly, they were perceived as being very costly and burdensome. And there was also some of the businesses said that the indicators should be flexible in terms of how they're actually used at the business level, and pick that up again later in the presentation. Thinking about waste prevention, the whole life cycle thinking and through life economics was deemed critical by a number of the respondents. And the need to understand the quality of recycling, not just whether something's recyclable, but what level of recycling can you actually achieve? You know, are you downcycling, or can you keep the value of that product? So being able to understand that, and can you actually communicate that to consumers? You know, it's a complicated concept. Is that something that you can actually start to think about? How would you put a label on to identify that? Something that was actually very common is that the information flow is as important as material flow in thinking about resource efficiency. How do you make sure that the person at the next stage can understand everything that you've put into it and the potential for recyclability of those different components? So that, you know, how can the European Commission actually facilitate that information flow is a really important question. And also in that, all of the actors in the resource efficiency frame, the businesses, the governments, the consumers, can the EU do more to facilitate those interactions to try and build that resource efficient economy? A few of the businesses also spoke about the carbon price and the EU ETS. Some felt that the carbon price was an extremely useful thing, and that it should be supported, that the carbon price should be a proper carbon price, and that the signal from the carbon price shouldn't be dampened by anything else. Others thought of the ETS as something that we should think about. You know, it's being developed, the principle is being developed. Can we use that more for material efficiency? In theory, it should make a lot of sense for material efficiency. So can we use that more? And looking at the barriers to resource efficient business models, this is one of the longer term recommendations about the need to build new business models. And the leasing economy is something that's been spoken about a lot as having real potential for driving resource efficiency. And certainly as a principle, it's one that very much makes sense. But how can we actually help businesses put that into operation? In some cases it works really well, it's kind of very simple. In others it has potential, but that actual implementation is quite complicated. A lot of businesses also pointed to the fact that there's a lot of short-termism. They're looking at payback periods of less than 3 years. So how can we actually get resource-efficient business models? How can we overcome that short-term attitude? And the fact that R&D is costly and risky. You know, the TRL stages are often called the valley of death. You know, how do we help businesses actually get over that R&D stage? Others pointed to more practical barriers, such as access to high quality materials. With metals, a lot of work has been done around materials. One of the respondents I spoke to pointed to high quality resins. You know, how can you get other materials that are actually high quality and can support much more resource efficient use? Industrial symbiosis was also spoken by a number of the different participants. The difficulty of implementing this on existing sites and the need for a planning approach that can support that. But then where it can't be done locally, how can we facilitate cross-border movement of materials to achieve a scale? So now it comes on to my 2 pence. And this is kind of trying to bring together some of the things that were very common threads, even though they may have been speaking about different particular measures or either short-term or long-term priorities. These are some of the things that were very common. And the first one is making the case. There are a lot of very committed people in business that are trying to introduce more efficient business models, more resource-efficient processes, but they need to make a case internally. They have a lot of internal barriers. They need to be able to get that to pay back within less than 3 years. They need to convince people if it's more. They need to get the budgets for the R&D. How do we help businesses address those internal barriers? So how can we actually help make the case? Second thing that was really common was the need for a level playing field. Teresa mentioned in her presentation about that. And the EU is good. Doing things at the EU level does provide a level playing field within Europe, but actually global is better. A lot of companies, particularly around the reporting burden, it was other people aren't having to do that. So this was something where it was seen it was a real importance to actually address both the geographical difference in the level playing field, but also in comparing kind of state against listed companies. There are a lot more requirements on listed companies that actually don't apply to state bodies or private companies. So that was another of the different ways in which there was a perception of not having a level playing field. And also the number of areas where just more evidence is needed, more research is needed, and this links to the making the case internally as well. And this is a real area that the EU can come in on, is to actually provide that really strong evidence base, so when people are making the case internally, they actually have all the evidence there. And the final point, it very much links to kind of Andrew's presentation at the beginning, is we've actually found it really hard to find businesses that were prepared to talk to us about resource efficiency. And this is probably due to the fact that there are small teams working in this area that have lots of requests of this nature from researchers and universities, from NGOs, from various other people, all trying to get kind of their time and their energy and their thoughts. But I also wonder, is there an apathy among businesses? Do they actually believe that the resource efficiency agenda is being pushed at the European Union level? Do they feel that it has the weight, it has the strength and has the commitment from the European Commission? So that's kind of an open question. So my final slide is really to kind of draw in all the things that I think that the European Commission can do, and things that businesses identified that they would like help from the European Commission on in driving forward the resource efficiency agenda. First one is supporting those early stages, helping with the R&D, whether this is through kind of partnerships, whether it's through funding, whether it's actually the second one actually providing the evidence base. Thirdly, they thought that the European Commission could facilitate relationships, so help build that partnership between consumers, between businesses, and between governments to drive forward the agenda, and that the Commission will be in a really good place to do that. As I mentioned, the information flow, can the European Commission do anything to facilitate that information flow? And then show leadership and vision. And this really points to that apathy point. And the European Commission, if it's strong and shows that this is something that they commit to, business then has the certainty that this is going to be a key policy point, and then they can commit more resources on their own side. And then finally, getting everybody on board, making sure that the European Commission are engaging both all of the member states in themselves, but then also globally, to try and make sure that European businesses can be resource efficient and competitive. So that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle, and early insights, and there's a fair bit of work still to do on that, but I hope that will at least provide us with the basis for a few questions. I'm not going to say anything at this stage, I might sum up a bit at the end, but I'm sure you'd much rather ask Teresa and Michelle some questions, given that they're the people who've been doing this work. So if you'd like to come to the front, Teresa, Michelle, and we'll see what questions were there. Yeah, gentlemen there.
Hello, Richard, I'm from the School of Construction Project Management. You're talking about the companies that you've spoken to. What sort of sizes are you dealing with? Are you dealing with SMEs? Are you dealing with big businesses?
It's mostly been on the big business side.
Right. Just from we've been delivering some eco-design training to SMEs for part of the EU agenda, and finding that the big organisations, depending on the small ones, to deliver the sustainability and their corporate social responsibility. So it all gets passed down.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's a very interesting insight indeed. We decided to concentrate on the larger companies because we thought they would be the ones that would be interested in the single market kind of issues because they operate in more than one country. But it's very interesting if you say that actually it's the smaller companies that are doing that. So thanks for that. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Joseph Dario from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's very interesting presentations. Just to pick up on the point of the resistance that there is, maybe it's almost a rhetoric legacy when all resource efficiency stroke material efficiency agenda has been very closely linked to the environmental agenda. And Commissioner Potočnik used to joke about this a lot. He says, whenever I walk into a room, it's like people have seen Shrek, the green monster, anti-business kind of thing. So a lot of that rhetoric kind of sticks, and the big businesses fail to, and small ones sometimes as well, fail to see the opportunity side as well. So there is a big need for case studies, and we've crunched the numbers on the economic potential for circular economy for Europe, and it's actually quite substantial. So maybe there's a lack of communication on that front. And also, as Andrew was mentioning earlier, Juncker doesn't want to be remembered as the president of the Commission who dealt with plastic bags, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we're still in an evolution of the waste policy in general, and frankly there's nothing more unsexy than waste in there. So maybe there is a question of communication as well, of the kind of language and framing that's used around those topics that could actually engage more stakeholders.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if you're saying, do you want to take part in a study that's looking at how Europe can drive cost efficiency, we probably would have got more responses. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to comment on the language stuff, Teresa? It's come out of the policymakers.
I think it's right. I mean, I think there's has been a step back to the old kind of discourse that resource efficiency has been seen as something like this environmental policy and doesn't have to do anything with our growth and jobs discourse, so we don't want to deny our resource efficiency agenda. While the other commissioner was trying to kind of do the different thing, trying to actually work on the synergies between growth and job creation and resource efficiency. And also the response from some of the businesses have been the same. That has been, well, actually, growth and jobs in Europe don't come from the old traditional, like industrial, very traditional industrial base, but it comes from much more high-tech industries that are actually very active on the resource efficiency agenda. So they are very willing to get involved and do that more on that side. So I think that's definitely an issue there of discourse, and the discourse that Juncker has been using has been trying to kind of sideway the resource efficiency agenda as something environmental policy that doesn't have anything to do with our growth and jobs.
Yeah, and even degrowth to a certain extent. It's like going back, if you take the caricatural approach, it's almost like he's saying, these guys want you to go back to 1 acre and a horse or something like that.
Okay, I'm going to stop there now. because I think you probably want a brief break, but I'd like more or less to start back here on time at 5:30, when we'll have a panel discussion. Something that I'm just going to inject into the air, so to speak. I was fascinated by that statement that Andrew quoted, which supposedly came from President Juncker, about not being wanted to be remembered, about the Commission having to focus on the big things rather than the small things. And then what Teresa's just said about not being wanted to be remembered for the person who did something about plastic bags. I wonder how many people can remember here who the pre-Barroso president was.
Prodi?
Prodi? He was a president at some point, but not sure whether it was the pre-Barroso one. And what do you think he would be remembered for? Very interesting, you see. I mean, actually, if Juncker was going to be remembered as the guy who sorted out plastic bags, boy, this is a signal improvement on what most Commission presidents are remembered for. But there's a serious point now, which I'd like the panel members here to think about a bit, which is whether actually the Commission should concentrate on the big things, and whether actually the Member States and the Parliaments will allow it to concentrate on the big things. I mean, big rhetoric is one thing, of course. They can talk about jobs and growth till the cows come home. Or whether actually the role of the Commission is to get this level playing field, which depends almost entirely on small things. Because if it's not a level playing field and it's bumpy, it's because small things aren't working. So that's something for the panel to think about, whether actually the focus on the big picture, which you can imagine is what the ambitious politicians who have become commissioners would want to do, whether actually that is the right way in which Europe in the current juncture might be taken forward. So
We have actually one more presentation, or we were supposed to have one more presentation from Louis, that we can do it by either now or after the break.
let's do it after the break, if we may. I'm sorry, I was taking my, I picked up an agenda just there and I didn't see that it was on there. So I'm sorry, Louis. If you'd like to get yourself ready,
I'll be happy to have a break.
we'll bring you in for a break. We'll start again soon after 5:30. Please be back in time for that.